Hello. In this episode of Cloud State of Play, we are talking about sustainability in the cloud, data streaming, analytics and data pipelines, and the State of AI Report 2023. So please stick around if you want to hear more about these topics. Hello and welcome to the Cloud Therapist channel. I'm Richard Simon. This is the November episode of Cloud State of Play. As always, I have the irrepressible Paul Bevan with me. Paul is the Director of Infrastructure Research at Bloor Research. More on Paul and what he gets up to when he's not having a chat with me will be in the description of the video. But in the meantime, let's say hello to Paul.
Hello, how are you? I feel I ought to pop up like Mr. Punch, actually, irrepressible.
Something like that, yes.
Something like that, yeah. No, good. I'm good. Richard, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. So Paul, I can't believe that we're at the end of another year. It's been like unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the fact that our next episode is going to be the review episode for the year. Yeah,
it's been quite a year too, so I think that could be an interesting one.
there's a lot been happening, yeah, very recently and also earlier on. Yeah, I am looking forward to that. Yeah. So hopefully, yeah, we'll do a review in the December edition, and I think we might be festive again in our attire. What do you think?
Okay. I'm getting too old for this, Lark.
I know.
I had to borrow the jersey last year,
and you may have to borrow it again. Okay, right. So, what are our three topics for this month? So, what do we have? Oh, yes. So we had you had two for this month. So the first one that Paul wants to go through was sustainability in the cloud. So that's going to be interesting. Also, talks about green and being green and stuff like that and sustainable. The second topic was a little bit of a mixture: data streaming, analytics, and data pipelines. Now, I've not rehearsed these with Paul. We've not even discussed what he was going to say, but I do trust you that the content is going to be useful and informative. And the third one I wanted to bring to the attention this month was a State of AI report for this year. So that's a very interesting and extensive report that a firm by the name of Air Street Capital has recently produced, and it kind of came across my desk, so to speak. So yeah, I think we'll do those three. Are you ready, Paul?
I'm ready.
Cool. So let's go. Let's kick off with the sustainability in the cloud.
Okay. I mean, clearly this is a hot topic now. Everybody's sort of got the bug, as it were, and realised that something needs to be done and done rapidly. So I thought we ought to just to get to grips with some of the key issues. And when you talk about sustainability in the cloud, the first thing that I'm aware of is the fact that a lot of companies who've migrated to the cloud have sort of taken their eye off the ball and thought, actually, I've passed the problem to somebody else. So a couple of things here. Firstly is it's a shared responsibility model. If you actually look on the Amazon website, for example, there's a really good set of statements around its sustainability program.
Yeah.
But it makes the point quite clearly that they are responsible for the sustainability of the cloud, and that the customer is responsible for the sustainability in the cloud. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? I mean, it means basically that if you throw inefficient systems into the cloud without doing anything, they will still be inefficient and they will be using more resource than they should do. So you have to be careful about that. And in fact, it can get worse. And I was, reading various reports that says the mere fact that you can now spin up things rapidly Lots of different departments can start spinning. If you're spinning up inefficient systems effectively, you're going to be in a worse position than you were when you were on premises. So don't take it that just because you go to the cloud, that is going to be naturally greener and more sustainable. Now, having said that, most data centers, cloud data centers, are going to be far more efficient than old enterprise data centers. It's just, a fact of life. They are modern. So you just need to, people need to be aware there's something called, when you're looking at sustainability, whether your scope 1 readings, your scope 2 and scope 3, this is sort of EU sort of regulations around sustainability. And scope 1 is obviously the things that you're very directly in control of. When you go to the cloud, actually, it goes right down to scope 3, but it's still part of your supply chain. Therefore, you've still got a level of responsibility to make sure, firstly, that the cloud you go to is being efficient in the way it uses it, it is being sustainable, and can you prove that? But also that the systems that you're migrating to the cloud if it's SaaS, it's different. But if you're managing your own application, you've just put it into infrastructure as a service, then you've got a level of responsibility yourself. So don't think that just because you've put it to the cloud, you can stop thinking about sustainability. Tick, I've done it. It's not that case.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to cover, and this is sort of cool in one sense. Sorry to pun, in the sense of cooling. But clearly AI and the high performance compute requirements of AI and a lot of other things going on are going to put tremendous pressure on existing cooling systems.
Right.
And it was interesting to see Microsoft just last week announced a new set of AI chips that they were AI accelerators they were going with. But also at the same time, they were looking at the whole of the infrastructure stack and developing a completely new racking layout, which was water cooled. The rack is water cooled.
Right.
Okay. So as opposed to using, the chillers, chilled water towers and blowing cold air through, we're going to see more and more of a move towards water being used for cooling rather than for cooling the chillers that blow cold air. Right. One of the frightening things that I saw, and I will send you the link so people can see this, was a discussion about this, that said the way in which chips are going to develop and the number of transistors on a chip is going to develop over the next 7 to 8 years means that in order to keep them cool, using current technology, you might get wind speeds inside your data center in excess of 40 miles an hour.
Wow.
Just to keep it cool. So you're going to have to go down a different route. And so immersion cooling, water cooling is actually going to be very, very important over the next few years. Comes with challenges because obviously you need to rethink your data center layout and plumb it. So actually, you can see some of the new data centers being built, going down that route of making sure that they can do water cooling. But a lot of existing data centers might find that quite difficult because you're actually going to lose some of the space as you try and rejig it for water cooling. But the bottom line is, and as I say, I'll send the link to the chat. If you're still using air cooling rather than water cooling, by 2030 you are almost unsustainable given what's happening to chip density and the power requirement of chips, and that raises questions around power usage. So again, going off grid. All sorts of things going on at the moment. We've seen Amsterdam and Dublin run into problems with their grids. Yeah. To the point where they've moratorium in Amsterdam on building new data centers. I think that's just been removed. Dublin, really concerned about what's the ability of the Irish grid to support all that's going on.
Yeah.
And this is only going to get worse. So you're seeing the big cloud providers going off grid. So you'll see a lot more off grid in terms of using solar, using wind, and not relying on nuclear, yeah, all sorts of things. So it's just an interesting area. But I think the one thing I wanted to get across to people listening to this is you need to be aware that just giving your applications or your infrastructure into the cloud does not absolve you from responsibility.
Yeah.
And there's you can't just tick the box and say, actually, I got rid of all, I'm now much greener than I was because I've got rid of all my on-premises compute. Not quite that simple.
Yeah. And I did kind of read an article or two, and it kind of seemed to put sustainability kind of into three parts. So I think you mentioned a couple of those. So sustainability of the cloud. So that's kind of obviously the cloud provider's sort of responsibility. Sustainability in the cloud, which is the enterprises or the customers, responsibility. And that would be through, things like FinOps, cloud cost management, and what some people are calling green ops as well. And that's kind of, I think, maybe the combination of those. Don't laugh. That's what I read. I saw that little snigger there. So
I love it as an industry.
Green ops, yeah.
Every time, poor old ops gets so many things attached to it.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it'll be bewilderment ops soon after that, or something like that. And then the other one is the third one is sustainability through the cloud. So that's actually kind of doing some kind of innovation and using cloud as the vehicle to do it with. So I don't know how that would work without the other two. Maybe it will work through two, but you probably need to do the third one as well. So sustainability in the cloud. So off the cloud is taken care of for you by the cloud providers. In the cloud is something you need to do. But then if you're going to use the cloud, so through the cloud to do something, then you might need sustainability in the cloud as well. So
I think you need, but I mean, through the cloud,
all three of them.
Through the cloud is interesting, of course, because it's the ability to have much more compute power looking at the problems we've got with sustainability. So I think one of the things that is interesting, and again, AI will probably come and play into this. What are the newer developments and technologies that this is going to enable when you're looking at how do I, make systems more efficient? How do I deliver new ways of doing things? And the cloud has a big role to play in that. I hadn't sort of really thought about the through the cloud one, but that certainly comes to play.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so shall we move on to the second one? So your second topic was the data streaming, analytics, and data pipelines. I don't know why you selected those particular three, but
well, I mean, they were three representative ones, I think. No, from my perspective, I've sort of come late to the data story, and it's almost as if it sort of snuck up on me without me really noticing. I'm an infrastructure guy, but one of the things that I've been very aware of, I've got colleagues who are data specialists, is the growing importance of data now, with training AI models, the growth of data coming from the Internet of Things, this huge expansion of sensor technology, the global and distributed nature of the data that's being captured, and the challenge that's posing for applications. And again, even the way in which we build applications today, microservices based, is you're ending up with sort of lots of little areas where data needs to be sent to. And where does it come from? So this was the idea of the data pipelines. One of the things that I've spotted is that in the whole, let's broadly call it the AI ops space, this sort of whole monitoring and management of your hybrid infrastructure, is that we've seen a number of companies in that space have to re-engineer their whole data architecture.
Mm.
actually become, and so if you look at a company like Big Panda that is AI ops specialist,
Yeah.
they now call themselves a data company. It's really interesting. And if you look at what Cisco's just done and buying Splunk,
Yes.
there is clearly a big focus now on what do we do with the data. So I think at one level, it was just a real realization that the amount of data floating around out there needs some very different technologies. Again, being a bit of an old-fashioned, mainframe guy, I understood databases, and you sort of got distributed databases. Yeah, okay, I get that. But, a lot of the way things work now, that the idea of relational databases has sort of almost gone out the window. I mean, you wonder whether relational databases are still going to exist, in years to come, because there are so many other different forms.
We might do a topic on it, Paul.
Well, exactly. Databases, time series databases, and the way in which data now can be analyzed in real time without you having to move it all into a data warehouse.
Yeah,
it's absolutely, it's fascinating, and it's being driven, by this growth of sensor technologies, but also suddenly use cases are now viable that were never viable, even 5 or 10 years ago. Yeah. So you looked at fraud analysis and detection in financial services. You looked at or automated trading, and they had to use complex event processing to try and understand what was going on, and sort of manipulating data in so many different ways. And today, with the streaming analytics platforms, that data is literally almost streamed on the fly, and you're not using the data twice. So one of the things that we're seeing with all that data around is don't move it.
Yes.
Move the processing to the data.
Right.
Where you can, and where you can't, don't change, don't, if you like, move it and change it. Don't do the old ETL routines. Federate the data, and so you need these pipelines. Suddenly you've got, rather than a small number of pipelines, you've got a huge number of pipelines.
Yeah.
And making sure that those are effective. But it wasn't possible 10 years ago to do what's being done with data today. And it's just going to get more and more pressure on data pipelines, on streaming analytics platforms. And it's actually, and the reason I came across it is it sort of infuses itself into the infrastructure itself. Because one of the things you start thinking about is how and where do I process data? Do I use an in-memory database? Do I need some form of architectural change that says, how do I minimize the number of network hops I have to do? All those sort of things, and that's being driven by the volume and the value of data.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I think coming into next year we might need to consider is, how do you value your data? How do you value your data on your balance sheet, for example? It becomes incredibly important. So it's for me, I'd sort of ignored the problem until it was impacting the infrastructure, and it was impacting the infrastructure in big ways, changing the nature of what we do. So that's why I think it's really interesting. I mean, you come back to data analytics or the streaming analytics, and the other interesting area is to see, if you like, the battle between the old, the IBM, SAS Institute, people who've got a history of analytics. And the new open source companies that have been sort of coming along and getting involved in that. And you've seen a shift in the course of the last year, 18 months, I think, in terms of the new entrants, the open source ones, getting more and more influence, I think, in that marketplace, and obviously challenging the IBMs and the Oracles and the SaaS and various other, people who've been around a long time in an analytics sense, with a whole new paradigm of event streaming and data streaming and analytics on the fly. Again, without open source, would we have been able to go down that route? I mean, it's an interesting conversation, different conversation about, once it becomes mainstream, how do you make it a real business case for the vendors themselves? And we can have, well, I'm sure we'll have more of those arguments about how do you commercialize or don't commercialize open source.
Yeah.
But the open source, I think, has helped deliver quite a significant step change in the way streaming analytics, data pipelines, all starting to work. So it's from my perspective, data. Almost everybody is a data company these days, and if you go back to the origins of computing, it was called data processing.
Yeah.
We've almost got away from the fact that it's data processing. Apps become the sort of key.
We got distracted for a few decades, but we're back.
The oldies are back. Data's back. Data back. We'll be having data processing managers soon.
Yeah. dig up the old job descriptions from the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely. But no,
80s.
It's just, I think, we've tried to shoehorn data into too many specific types, like relational databases, which was fine for a while, but I think with the sort of the explosion of data, and B, the processing power and the manipulation that's available to us, we don't need to do those things. I mean, I'm seeing one of the things that I'm really interested about is data management platforms that are both analytics and transactional database platforms. Right. I mean, InterSystems are fascinating. I mean, you do analytics on the fly and you can develop applications on top of it. So they're saying, don't use the data twice. Don't rework the data, just use the same data, federate it and use the same. So there's some really interesting things. Maybe we ought to get one of my colleagues who's a real data specialist to come in and do that if people are really interested in, the nuts and bolts of streaming analytics. Just for me, I think it's a realization that data has become the critical element almost to delivering value. And I go back to my days as a non-exec in an NHS trust, and them going, we don't need any more data. We want information. And you're going, yes, but the data you've got is poor. I was going to. This probably goes out before the watershed. I was going to use a different word.
Yeah.
So,
I can always edit it out later, Paul.
Bleep it out when I.
Yeah. No, yeah, and I do. I mean, I do get that, and obviously this kind of pressing time from these sort of AI platforms that we've now kind of seen exploding. They're certainly accepting or taking in a lot of data and also generating a lot of data. So again, although a lot of that's kind of it is maybe ephemeral, so it's not. It's not something that's kind of business, sort of type of data. It's kind of more consumer, but nevertheless, it's still data, so to speak.
Absolutely, and from my perspective, and I know you were when you went to the big data world, you're sort of nonplussed, I think, by the fact that so much of the stuff on View is about governance and quality and those.
Yeah, and the term that I picked up was data observability.
Yeah,
so good old observability kind of got shifted a little bit into the data space as well. Yeah. So there's a number of companies that were talking about data observability. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah.
The other one, kind of just talking about sort of data stream, we've seen the rise of things like the Kafka platforms, for example, when it comes to streaming of data. And this ability, there's a lot of people talking about kind of event-driven sort of approach to to developing applications, to reacting to kind of business conditions, things like that, where the data is streamed, it's analyzed, it's processed, and your system reacts to it in accordance with the result. And you never store anything. You don't actually store the original captured data that you ingested. It's kind of ingested, processed, and then you react to it, and you might store some metadata, and you might shunt some of that back to HQ for maybe more processing, or more analytics or something like that. But actually the data that you're streaming in, whether it's kind of, let's say, from IoT devices or something like that, it's not actually maintained. It's not stored anywhere. It's processed on the fly, and your application, reacts to that particular event data, and that's it. And then it's not stored. It's maybe the resulting metadata is stored or something like that.
Yeah. So sometimes the result, you get this sort of sense and respond type environment. And you might want to pull some of the response data out, but yeah, the straight answer is, of course, the networks will not be able to handle the volume of data if we keep moving stuff around. Data has got to stay in place effectively. But yes, it's an interesting one in the sense that a whole load of data is becoming stateless. It's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. So what do you think about kind of the word analytics? Is that kind of getting a little bit old-fashioned now, or is it still kind of, with the rise of sort of AI and these other sort of approaches to how we sort of analyze things? Is kind of BI and analytics still there?
Yeah, I think the sort of BI one has gone, because BI was a sort of, work out what you had to know, what it was you wanted to know. And how you needed to be able to organize it. So I think, yes, you need business intelligence, but it's very different than the BI systems that you would have seen in the past. Analytics, yeah, you absolutely. But the key word there, I think, is becoming predictive analytics.
And maybe some of that BI was BS. So. So maybe that's why it's gone away. So the other point that you touched on was the rise of kind of different types of databases. So obviously RDBMS or relational has kind of been the more staple, but we've seen things like time series, we've seen vector for AI, and various other ones kind of all on the rise. Obviously that's meant that those are already in the database space have kind of done the usual marketing search and replace and put in all those terms into their nomenclature as well, into their content. But clearly there is different approaches to how we deal with that data, and I think that's quite rightly so, that we don't try to shoehorn something that doesn't work into a new way of thinking, into a new innovation like AI, for example.
And again, back to the data pipeline. What you're doing is saying, I am taking data from a number of different sources, and I am processing that data and sending the output to a series of different types of sources. So that's why you're seeing companies have to re-architect what they're doing. Because I was dealing 2 years ago with a company that was really looking at almost 3D sort of type view of the world. What was it? Digital twin type thing. But they were still trying to use Oracle databases. And yes, you can do it, but it's clunky. It's awful to try and support. Whereas actually, their challenge was, well, you need to go to these different types of databases, whether it's vector, whether it's time series, and probably a combination of both. But then you need to re-architect your data pipelines. And again, so a couple of the companies I follow quite closely as an analyst went dark on me for the best part of 18 months while they did it.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. And then the other aspect that you mentioned was around sort of the federation of data. So things like data mesh, I think, which we have touched on in the past in a previous episode, has also kind of come in to help with that. So it's kind of giving you that sort of approach to how you manage and govern your data.
Yeah, and there's obviously not a fight, but you've got to think about, do you want a mesh or do you want a fabric?
Mm.
So, and again, this is, do you want to be completely distributed like a fabric?
Mm.
So, if you like, all the governance is distributed,
Yeah.
or are you having the more centralized control of a mesh? But yes, it is. How do I pull that together into something that applications can use without having to, think about all the constraints of, how do I configure my application for a relational database or for or an object database or whatever. The application developer using a fabric is just you carry on and do that, and here's the API, and then you can get hold of the data. So it's a very different approach. Speeds it up, because one of the problems has always been that data is sometimes the bottleneck in any development process, isn't it? And then what you
Yeah.
do. And again, the fabric, potentially, particularly if you use a sort of AI based smart fabric, it's going to speed that process up, potentially. And again, that's something for another time when I'm a little more, up to speed on it. But it's been interesting to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I do agree with that, and I think that space will continue to develop, and there'll be influences from things like AI and so on as well on that. Okay, so on to our third topic, which was this State of AI 2023 report. Now, as I said, this report is extremely comprehensive. It's like over 150, 160 pages of very dense information. It's in presentation format, so easily downloadable. I'll provide a link to the report itself. It's by a firm called Air Street Capital. I have to say I've never heard of them, but I'm very grateful that somebody in my LinkedIn circles brought it to my attention, and yeah, very thankful for that particular post, and that was quite useful to get hold of the report itself. I have to say, like I said, I'm quite impressed by the depth of the report. Probably kind of the most comprehensive I've seen so far. They seem to have actually been doing this for some time, so they do have like a comparison of their predictions from for this year in comparison with what they kind of predicted last year. So that's quite interesting, and it kind of puts the likes of Gartner and IDC and Forrester in the shade a little bit when it comes to sort of AI reporting and things like that, because it's extremely in depth. Whereas we see a lot of uses for AI and things like that from from these sort of usual research households. The Air Street Capital has really gone in depth into it. So they have a number of sections. They've broken down the report into a number of sections. And those sections are research, industry, politics, and safety. So those are the main ones. And then they do a 2024 predictions as well, which should be interesting because we can probably revisit that next year to see how good their predictions were. Now, as we know, for the sake of integrity of this channel, we never do predictions here. We always do projections, right? That's our wording. I think that we discussed in the January edition of Cloud State of Play. So we'll stick to that. But Street Capital, if you want to say predictions, that's up to you. So we'll leave that to for them to do. But let me just catch on a couple of those sections of the report, because I thought it was quite important, quite useful, quite interesting in terms of their data. Obviously, we can't do the whole report justice, but like I said, I'll provide a link in the description of this video. So in the research section, they said the ChatGPT continues to be the quote-unquote undisputed king of LLMs. So everybody else is kind of lagging behind really when it comes to trying to catch up with OpenAI in terms of their capability, and obviously now with the backing of Microsoft. Never mind the recent shenanigans happening in the news with OpenAI. They continue to be the leaders, I think, in that space. The interesting one for those who kind of want to do more open platforms is the Llama models that you can get as well. Llama 1 and Llama 2, I believe, are those. And those kind of tend to offer the capability of doing smaller models, so small language models or SLMs, and using data sets that are more enriched. So that helps the gen aspect of that, and be able to also embrace longer context as well. One of the things I think that the report said was that the context is now kind of the benchmark of how you look at these open AI, or rather general AI, or Gen AI, I should say, models. So Gen AI and all of these kind of models that are in that space are being measured or benchmarked through their sort of context capability. And obviously, if you have, if you use one of these open models, using things like Llama and what have you, you have a lot more efficiency in the infrastructure that you use as well. So that's kind of a positive, side effect, if you like. And then the third thing in that research section was synthetic data. So the synthetic data is kind of looking at non-natural generated data. So it's not, human generated data. And the fact that we're actually going to run out of human generated data as early as 2025 to feed into these AI models. So, there may be a need to kind of regurgitate, some of the data that's been generated, this so-called synthetic data, back into the next AI model that we want to train as well. So, yeah, so I don't know how, I'll just give you a kind of a moment to maybe comment on that.
So, I mean, that last one is fascinating. I mean, I've seen that context and that sort of enrichment of data play out within the AI ops space, using large language models and seeing how, when you enrich and give it context, you get answers back not only faster, but ones that the operations teams didn't spot. When you didn't enrich it and you didn't have it in context, potentially, it tended to pick up the same things that the operations teams had done, but maybe they weren't the right ones. It was getting right down. So I think that's quite important. I love this idea of synthetic data. It's more like, it feels more like, as you put more context in, it will then go back and revisit some of its assumptions and some of its, and as you enrich and as you put more and more context in there. So I mean, whether you call that data, or I presume it is still data, it's sort of building those links into the context. It'll go back and rework it. The idea of creating synthetic data is strange. I mean, you get this idea of synthetic data again when you're doing testing of networks and testing of things, because sometimes you can't get the live data that you need, but that is synthetic data. In that thing is just old data that you're using, and recontextualizing. This is what this sort of sounds like. I mean, the idea that AI itself creates more data seems, I'm trouble getting my head around that one, I must admit.
Yeah, I think it's saying that it's naturally sort of generated, it's non-human data. So it's anything that it provides as an output, and then that sort of interaction that you get is kind of maybe fed back either back into the model, as you said, for review, or it's used as an addition to the next model that you're going to train as well. So that's it. I think when they get it wrong, it's called hallucination. So that's the term that's actually used in the AI space to that. So that was the research section. The next section along was the industry section. So again, maybe 2-3 points that I picked up in that. First one was around NVIDIA breaking the market capitalization of $1 trillion. So that's really interesting. That obviously their chipsets and their GPU designs. There's as the report said, quote unquote, ferocious demand for their GPUs, and everyone wants them. Everyone from organizations, cloud providers, governments, and dodgy entities as well around the world, I'm sure. So we kind of touched on this space in the October episode when we spoke about the ARM and Intel, rather the Intel and AMD duopoly, with ARM kind of architecture really kind of coming in, rising and sort of challenging that. So yes, that was an interesting one around NVIDIA. Next bit was Gen AI, of course, led by ChatGPT. They've obviously had a massive explosion, on the scene in the space of things like, text and imaging, video, coding, and also the so-called kind of co-pilot markets as well. So where you kind of get some sort of assisted view. The amount of investment that's gone into those has racked up $18 billion from venture capitalists so far in the last 12 months. So that's, again, very, very interesting that's actually kind of, generated a lot of interest on that scene as well. And then the last one this was really interesting. This is kind of how I think Gen AI and kind of, LLMs in general are going to kind of affect some of the existing sort of established sort of platforms. Slide 89, if I'm not mistaken, talked about Stack Overflow usage. And it said that the Stack Overflow usage has actually dropped by 50%. That's halved in about 18 months since the Copilot and ChatGPT were actually introduced. And there's actually a graph that shows you that, and roughly that's what I looked at in terms of the data for people accessing or going to the Stack Overflow pages. So 50% drop in the last 18 months. So that was very interesting.
I don't think I'm really surprised by that. If you look at the way in which technology is developed, more and more technology has been used to replace areas that humans are not good at constantly ensuring, quality in a process. We couldn't have the chip designs today if we had, people trying to do it manually. It just got too complex, and actually the attention to detail. I mean, they always used to have, and I'm not trying to be sexist, but they always used to have women on assembly lines for in the early days of microprocessing, because they were more adept at that focus. Whereas a man, would probably he's thinking about, if you're like me, my
football,
35 different things at once. None to any to any depth.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised that one of the things that we're going to see is a much more efficient code base.
Yeah.
And there'll be developers out there going bloody cheek,
Yeah.
But the answer,
they
are going to be better at specific things like that. I think I don't think there's any doubt. The other one, if you want me to sort of go back, I want to go back to the first one about the NVIDIA and that.
Yes, yeah, in the industry section.
I mean, it is two things that come to mind. One is, and I've been reading 2 or 3 reports and articles in the last few weeks about this explosion of everybody, and you suddenly think everybody's going, oh, there's no problem with the supply chain. You're going, you've got to be joking. It's one of those ones where I'm naturally skeptical that says, if we continue to develop the demand for new chips, new processors, new systems at that sort of pace, there will be a problem in the supply chain somewhere. And it's just the sheer volume, never mind the sort of geopolitical situation that might throw things up in the air. And interestingly, come back, and we'll just go back to a sustainability issue too.
Yeah.
We need to get a circular economy going, about not wasting all the stuff that we're developing and throwing away. So I think all those sort of things says I'm worried, concerned. It doesn't keep me awake at night, put it like that, it's not that, but you keep thinking supply chain is going to be an issue.
Yeah, and we talked about the is AI going to kind of break the internet or break the cloud, I think was in one of the previous episodes. I can't remember which episode, dear viewers, but I'll find the link for that, I promise, and I'll put that in the description. But that we talked about kind of resources, constraints, and we mentioned a lot of this kind of, the use of nuclear power and things like that.
It's power, it's availability of, of the raw materials you need to do it, all those sort of things. And the other thing he was saying about the generating so much venture capital money is you have to question, is there a bubble here coming? Is there a bubble?
Yeah.
Now, I think most technology turns that go through this sort of phase do have a little bit of a bubble that bursts, but I think come back stronger. So the question is, are we going to get a bit of a bubble effect over the course of the next couple of years and a burst somewhere? But then, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the track, you end up with a much more stable, growing environment. At the moment, it just feels a little bit like the Wild West. It's cheap as everything's going mad.
Yeah, and it's a little bit like the what do they call it? The internet bubble, I think, the e-business bubble that we had in the late 90s and early 2000s.
That's right. Yeah.
So I am a little bit concerned that it might go in that direction. And like I said, I've already read a couple of reports that literally say the bubble is going to burst next year on AI. So,
and again, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have that bubble burst. Obviously, people who've invested money in it, that's going to be painful, and some people will have to transition maybe from one company to another. But I think there probably is a reckoning coming, because there's an awful lot of money being thrown at it without a huge amount of due diligence.
I think it may not be necessarily a bubble, although that could happen if things continue as they are.
We're not at that point yet, I don't think. But it's one of those ones where if this really takes off and everybody thinks, this idea of where's the next place I can make my fortune, then
it might be more of I'm perceiving it more of as a sort of the dust settling, in that space, and we'll maybe explore what the options will be going forward. For enterprises into next year as to how they can utilize, AI. We've seen kind of, the Gartners or whatever of the world put out messages about, what you can use it for, yes, but how can we use it for those things? That'll be, I think, the next.
There's a lot of piloting going on. I read a report that says something like 70 to 80% of large-scale enterprises have got, pilots going on at the moment on AI.
Yeah.
It's whether we move and how quickly we move beyond that phase to real, because you run into different types of problems that are not technology problems. There'll be process problems, there'll be cultural problems, and that might slow it down.
And talking of that, the other section is the politics section. So in that, it said in this report, it said that the world's kind of in regulatory camps, if you like, but there is no kind of global governance on AI. Now, obviously, we've had things like the recent meeting in London by the UK government on AI. The likes of Elon Musk turned up and had a sort of an AI summit and so on. I haven't read this, and we may cover this actually in the future. There's a UK government. There's a Frontier AI Task Force entity within the UK government, which has released a second progress report that was published recently. Again, I'll put a link in the description for our viewers. But that might be something that we can actually look at in the future as well. So that kind of political side, I know the UK government is kind of taking a much more sort of relaxed and open view when it comes to sort of AI regulation. But I know that also there is, the sort of the EU is looking at things, and the US government is looking at, and obviously there's been chip embargoes already on GPUs and things like that, on China and places like that.
Yeah, there's a number of places where things could get slowed down for whatever reason. But I think governments will struggle to keep up with the pace of development. They're always going to be behind the curve, trying to catch up. The question will be do they do anything that actually slows down development, which might be a good thing, might be a bad thing. I don't know. I think it's one we need to watch going forward. Sometimes they can be a little heavy-handed and put the mockers on things in the short term. But it is such a fast-moving environment that you sort of feel that government are going to struggle to keep abreast of what's going on.
Indeed, but nevertheless, excellent report. And like I said, really dense in terms of the information in there. And I will include a link to the reports. So I do recommend you guys downloading it. I think it would be very useful. Okay, so I think we're at the end. We've reached the end of this particular episode. Paul, thanks as always. Really appreciate your insights and comments. That's always very enlightening in terms of the conversation that we have and kind of bouncing off various ideas. And thank you for the two topics that you brought as well. So that was very, very interesting. So yeah, as I said, all the links for everything that we discussed will be in the description of the video. If you guys would like us to pick on a particular subject within reason and within context of the things that we discuss, please drop a comment on the YouTube of the description of the video, or the comment section of the video on the YouTube. That'll be appreciated. Yeah, let us know what you guys want us to talk about. Maybe we'll feature that in a future episode or something. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Look out for our December episode where we do a kind of a review of the year, probably with our Christmas jumpers on. They'll be back. You never know.
Will I be a Chelsea Christmas jumper? You didn't allow it last year.
Brilliant. It'll be something. It'll be something Christmassy anyway. All right, so that's it, guys. Bye for now.
Yes.
Thank you for watching this talk. If you enjoyed the content, please comment, share, like, and subscribe to support the channel. You may also want to check out some of the other videos on this channel. See you next time.